They showed their hand very early on that the ADF is going to be used in this rollout. Now, even though that army guy they had with the interview with Carl Stefanovich was using soft words such as, we might be help, we're going to be there for assistance if needed, what he also said was that this program, he called it the program, is going to ramp up and it's going to gather momentum. And he said it's going to be impressive and it's going to be robust. Now, once they've finished attacking the elderly and that phase is out of the way and they move to the general population, that's when they're going to be sending out the invites. I mentioned I got an email, I got an email from my local medical centre, we'll be in touch up there, so I'll get an invite from them. And of course, it doesn't come from the medical centre itself. It came from a different email, but I think that's where it's going to, probably a government monitored centralised email, because I was put on a subscription list without, being consulted. So I think that's where these invites are going to come. But like me, I think a lot of people are just going to ignore them in the first instance. Then they're going to ramp up the coercion where you can't go to pubs. They'll still have to let you get the basic necessities because that would be a step too far for them. But certainly any social disruption they can cause, they will. And look, no one's buying this bullshit where someone in a hotel quarantine has a case that they're not sick warrants locking down 2 million people for 5 days. And the more they keep going on with that bullshit, each time they use one of those cards, it becomes less palatable and less accepted by the Australian people. And with these coercive measures, the more time goes on, there's always pushback, and that pushback keeps getting stronger and stronger as time goes on, particularly as there is the fact that there's absolutely no effect on anybody's health or the health of the nation of this supposed virus is apparent. What, in a year's time, 2 years' time, nobody's sick, you want me to get a jab for something that isn't out there before I can go for a drink? They won't be able to maintain that position. So that's why they've rolled out the ADF really early on. To them, this is going to be like ripping off a Band-Aid really quickly. It's going to be swift, impressive, and robust. But we're 25 million people, and our defence forces aren't very big compared to our population. So they're not going to be able to muster up enough teams, particularly if there isn't a big uptake during the coercive stage, to be able to jab everybody. So where are these extra resources going to come from? Again, it comes back to this legislation they passed on the 8th of December that also includes immunity for foreign defence force and foreign police. Marketing that out in the public in order to get consent is going to be a bit of a problem for them. Having an Australian soldier with an Australian flag a lot of people will accept that. But when you've got a foreign person, they've just announced we're going to be bringing these foreigners in to jab you with something you don't want, I think that would almost be impossible to sell. So I don't think they're going to try to. The second obstacle they have to get over is actually having enough bodies here, enough foreigners here to assist with the ADF in rolling out this jab. So there's two parts. There's their immunity from criminal and civil liability, but there's also getting them here on the ground through a legal process while avoiding marketing it to the public. When you see headlines like this on our national broadcaster at the exact same time that this jab rollout is occurring, makes you ask a few questions. Later on in the article, they mentioned that this is a 10th annual rotation of US Marines in Darwin. So there is a permanent force of Marines in Darwin that have been there for 10 years. Now, this is a news story from 2018, where the US troops are now in Darwin, but questions remain as to why. So it mentions there's 1,500 US Marines, and down at the bottom, why this highly unusual deployment has become necessary in peacetime has never properly been explained. There was no parliamentary debate, no committees, no scrutiny, nothing like that. Nothing on Hansard that you can go and find out about. It's just that Gillard and Obama just announced it. And he's got here, it was a fait accompli. And he mentions that foreign troops on soil is a potential breach of a sovereign nation's defence. And in the case of Australia, there was no chance of an invasion at that point in time anyway. Now, he mentions that these Marines are there under the terms of the Force Posture Agreement, and that's in orange, and that was the link. Here it is, formalised back in August 2014. And the first thing to note is that it's the US military not entering into a treaty or an agreement with the Australian military, but a treaty with Foreign Affairs and Trade. A Force Posture Agreement And when you get into the document, all of the interaction is between the Australian Department of Defence and the US Defence Department. Now, I can only speculate that it was done under a treaty, under a foreign affairs treaty, rather than a defence treaty, because either the Constitution or the Defence Act, there might have been provisions in those either preventing or having a lot of conditions on foreign troops being here. But by having this treaty under foreign affairs, so I'm only speculating that might be how they've got around that. And here's some clauses from that treaty. Now, there's the URL at the top. You can type all that in and get to it yourself. So it provides necessary authorizations for the presence of United States forces in the territory of Australia, and situations indicated here in the activities of the United States contractors who may be present in connection with the Force Posture Initiative. So you've got the US military and their contractors. Now, this is the necessary authorization for their presence. And under 4C, if you look at one of their activities, is disaster relief. Now, it starts to become suspiciously apparent when you look at this legislation that came through, that first treaty gave them the authorization to be here, and now, conveniently, while they're here, they have immunity from civil and criminal liabilities for an activity that's named for why they're here, which is responding to disasters and emergencies. And in that article in 2018, the Journal can't work out why there's no explanation for this permanent deployment of American troops on Australian soil. And even more, I guess, puzzling, that why would they be here for? Why would they include disaster relief activities? This is like 10 years ago, remember? Well, I mean, when did we become such a feeble, incompetent nation? We used to be first world, that we can't deal with natural disasters, either ourselves or even with our own military, that they write this clause into this treaty. And under D there, such other activities as the parties may mutually determine. So outside of disaster relief, what else could they have these guys doing? Under some point 6 there, United States forces and United States contractors shall not engage in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations within Australia unless requested by the ANR. The ANR is the Australian National Representative for this treaty, means the Australian Department of Defence official or their nominated delegate. Well, of course, the Chief of the Minister gives the Chief of the Defence Force the go-ahead to deploy Australian troops. Well, there's nothing stopping them from telling this AN to include the foreigners at the same time. Now, this whole treaty is all one way. It only mentions US troops on Australian soil, not the other way around. So it's not exactly a balanced, equitable treaty. And then it says here that anything they do is with Australia's policy of full knowledge and concurrence, comma, where applicable. So in other words, they can even hide what they're doing. Sounds a bit like Pine Gap. Now, this is interesting as well, in that any of the economic activity that goes on within their facilities is deemed to have not occurred on Australian soil, and therefore is not derived in Australia, even though it's on our soil. It's almost like a sort of diplomatic immunity, but what it does mean is that the Australian Tax Office doesn't have any records on what's going on, so that's done in secret as well. And just one more thing about this treaty between the Foreign Affairs and Trade with the US Defence Department, as opposed to the Australian Department of Defence, is that I couldn't find it, but if someone wants to have a look through that PDF, there's no limit on the numbers that they can have here. It's not like they say, to a maximum of 5,000 or 10,000. They can have 1 million troops under this treaty. Not that they probably would, but hey, who knows? But there's no limit on the number of personnel or contractors. I mean, what are these contractors doing when the ATO doesn't have access to any of their financial records? Well, the ABC has announced to the public that these troops are here. No objection, Your Honour. Oh, well, they're here with our consent. And even though at least hundreds, perhaps even maybe 1,000 or two that were subscribed to my old channel ended up having 6,000 subs before they got taken down, we all wrote to all of the senators, all of the media, all of the politicians trying to get this is before it passed, trying to get public discussion on this bill, but the media just went absolutely quiet. Just, you could hear crickets from those guys. And this is legislation in our parliament that pertains to us, and you can't get the media, no matter how much you write to them, to even mention it. Chris Ullman, all these political correspondents all talking about Christian Porter, fucking hours and hours of fucking that bullshit. and Linda Reynolds, and she called her a fucking cow. But yet we couldn't get them to talk about this. Anyway, shouldn't get too worked up. But so according to them, they have our consent for the legislation, as well as these US Marines or contractors, whoever the hell they may be, are on our soil. Like I said, it's a two-part thing. Them to be here and then to have immunity, and that's exactly what they've got. All right, I'll finish it up now. Oh, look, you start making these videos. I could do a, an hour-long, 2-hour-long corporate documentary on all this stuff, but yeah, we're all a bit short of time. I'm actually up to 10 minutes on this one, probably too long. So, all right, that's it for this one.